Hedera hash graph, that's what we're going to be getting into in this video. This video is designed to help you guys understand Hedera hash graph. As cryptocurrency investors, we are looking for cryptos to invest in. And before doing so, it's a good idea to get an understanding of that individual crypto that you may be thinking of putting some money into to help you better make a decision. And by the end of this video, my aims are that you not only understand what Hedera is, how it works, who's behind it, the tokenomics, the pros and cons, and of course, I will give my own conclusion, which I think you may find an interesting one, because Hedera is not actually a blockchain. It is a DAG. It is a cryptocurrency, but isn't ran via blockchain technology. It uses a DAG, which we will get into, and I'll explain what a DAG is in this video and all the other really interesting things. And there's a kind of major company behind Hedera, which goes by the name of Swirl, which is a software company that essentially owns the consensus for Hedera and leases it out to be used by the kind of LLC that is behind Hedera, that is actually governed by 28 of the biggest companies in the world, including Google, Dell, Standard Charter, or Standard Bank, sorry, and a number of others. So we'll get into all that in this one. So without further ado, guys, let's get straight into this. I've got roughly about 40 slides, but I really wanted to get everybody on board with what Hedera is. And then it will help you make a better decision if you are thinking about or not thinking about investing into Hedera. So Hedera hash graph, what is it? Well, essentially Swirl, a software company that came about in 2015, is where the idea for Hedera hash graph came from. Swirl was founded by computer scientist Mance Harmon, CEO, and Lehman Bird, who I believe has a doctorate before his name. So he's a Dr. Lehman Bird, who is essentially the CTO. And there's a huge overlap between Swirl, who actually, like I say, owns the patent to the consensus, and they lease it out to a company that essentially is linked to the governing council, which also run the consensus nodes. But we'll get into all that. I don't want to spoil that. So this is the paper. This is where the idea for Hedera came from. Hedera's white paper was released by Swirl in 2016. Link in the description. So I'll leave a link in the description. The link is also here. This is the Swirl hash graph consensus algorithm, fair, fast, Byzantine, fault tolerant. This is from Lehman Bird, and this was published in 2016 on May the 13th. Swirl's text report, Swirl's, and it goes to talk about a number of things. It talks about an abstract, but we won't read through this. You can check that out for yourself in the description. So Swirl essentially behind Hedera. So they raised millions of dollars in funding during 2017's bull market to help build a division for Hedera from some absolutely major companies. Now, Hedera hash graph is essentially itself. So even though Swirl are behind it, the people who are in charge of Hedera essentially are known as Hashgraph Consortium LLC. So Hedera Hashgraph is a limited company, essentially, registered in Delaware, United States, which I think is under the Texas jurisdiction, registered as Hashgraph Consortium LLC. So even though Swirl came up with it, they don't own it. It's owned by Hashgraph Consortium, which officially incorporated in 2017, so over 5 years ago. So these guys have been about for a while, and the idea Hedera is not a new blockchain necessarily. It's actually been trading, I think, since 2019. But it is interesting. You know, I've actually really enjoyed looking into this because it's different, which I like. So interestingly, Hedera is owned and ran by companies known as the governing council that essentially run and decide what goes on with Hedera, consisting of, I think, 28 companies. These 28 companies are run the validating nodes, of the consensus nodes for Hedera, are the only people who can vote from the network. I think from fees, they get 90%, and then Swirl, which license the Hedera consensus to Hashgraph Corporations LLC, get 10%. So you can see why there's quite a few sort of blockchain ethical paradigms that are being challenged here already, but we'll explore a little bit more of that. So you can see Hedera is governed by the world's leading organizations, and it absolutely is. This is a huge pro for Hedera because these guys have some of the largest partners in the world. And these guys have been members since 2017. So we can see you've got the likes of DBS, Dell, LG, just to name a few, Dutch Telecom, Google. You've got the IBM. You've got some absolutely massive names here. Boeing, Chainlink Labs, that are really EDF, that are behind Standard Bank, that are behind Hedera. And this is a huge positive, I think, to be taken. So the consensus nodes receive transactions, work together to determine consensus using the hash graph, and store the public ledger's latest state. So it is a blockchain, it is a crypto, essentially. The Hedera Governing Council currently run all mainnet consensus nodes. As Hedera advances to the path to decentralization, anyone will be able to run a consensus. So for now, the only people that run the node, and this is still the case, this is recent news from the team, are essentially the people who, the governing council, which again calls into question this whole idea of decentralization. The governing council can also remove any smart contract that's built on top of Hedera, just to throw that out there. So they do have a path that plans to become more decentralized, although this is going to take a lot of time. Phase 2 of Hedera's network evolution, many permissioned consensus nodes. When the Hedera network's security, stability, and incentives are determined to be sufficient by the Hedera Governing Council, parties and organizations will be invited to join the Hedera mainnet as permission consensus node operators and earn the Hbar consensus. So this is interesting. And the thing is, with these guys having such big partnerships, well, it's likely that they're going to be chosen. If I believe that the world is moving towards blockchain, every company is going to be running something on the blockchain, whether it's a DApp, whether it's their own blockchain, whether it's an NFT project, then these guys already have a good foot through that door. And because of the people that profit from the underlying use of Hedera, or the underlying running of Hedera, they're going to sort of push people through those gates to join the Hedera blockchain. That's my thinking with it, and why I think it may not do badly as an investment. Not financial advice, just my own opinions thus far. However, I do have concerns. So Swirl, however, owns the rights to the Hashgraph consensus mechanism, and they rent it out to the Hashgraph Consortium LLC, which is run by the big companies. So Hedera's code is not open source, which is unusual in the blockchain world. And they have very strict policies on who can review and what can be done with the code once viewed, which is interesting. Most blockchains are open source and they want people to improve on the codes. So Hbar, as it's commonly referred to, isn't actually a blockchain. It's a DAG, but it does use distributed ledger technology to run the network. DAG stands for Direct Acyclic Graph, which is where Hedera hash graph essentially comes from. So I'm going to minimize my face a little bit smaller because you may not be able to see some of the data that I'm presenting on screen. Get straight back to it. So a brief word on DAG. So I want to explain what DAG is. There are some of you may be Coty fans. Coty is a DAG. And this, I think, if you don't want to find out what a DAG is and you're not that interested in the underlying technology that runs Hedera, please just skip forwards a minute or so. But a brief word on DAGs. What are they? A directed acyclic graph. DAG is a conceptual representation of a series of activities. The order of the activities is depicted by a graph, which is visually represented as a set of circles. Each one represents an activity, some of which are connected by lines, which represent the flow from one activity to another. Each circle is known as a vertex, and each line is known as an edge. Directed means that each edge has a defined direction, so each edge necessarily represents a single directional flow from one vortex to another. Acyclic means that there are no loops, i.e. cycles, so it's kind of random in the graph, so that for any given vertex, if you follow an edge that connects that vertex to another, there is no path in the graph to get back to that initial vertex. So it's kind of complicated, but this is kind of how it works. In opposed to a blockchain just being one chain and you have layer twos off of it, it's kind of like I don't know how to explain it, like a net of validators, and they reach consensus in this random kind of fashion, which is interesting. So why are direct acyclic graphs useful? DAGs are useful for representing many different types of flows, including data processing flows. By thinking about large-scale processing flows in terms of DAGs, one can more clearly organize the various steps and the associated order for these jobs. In many data processing environments, a series of computations are run on the data to prepare it for one or more ultimate destinations. This type of data processing flow is often referred to as a data pipeline. As an example, sales transactions data may be processed immediately to prepare it for making real-time accommodations to consumers. As part of the process lifecycle, the data can go through many steps, including cleansing, correct, incorrect, invalid data, in brackets, aggregation, calculated summaries, enrichment, identifying relationships with other relevant data, and transformations, writing the data into a new format. So you can see potentially why companies may want this, so that you can do many things with this data. So one key characteristic of a DAG and other data processing flows that they model is that there can be multiple paths in the flow. This is important because it recognizes the need to process data in multiple ways to accommodate different outputs and needs. In the example flow in the next slide, a stream of sensor data is processed. The data is first loaded from the sensor, then are separated by the sensor type. Sensor X data will be summarized per second type. Sensor X, will be summarized and then analyzed in real time. If any critical status is observed, an alert is sent. The data is also saved from long-term storage and possibly other analysis. Also in this flow is data from sensor Y, which for now is summarized per minute and then sorted the same long-term store as the data for sensor X. So this is essentially how it works. It's kind of complicated, but that's the basics of it. It basically breaks up this data. So read data from sensor, separates data to sensor type, so sensor X and the sensor, summarizes data per minute, summarizes data per second, and then you can even expand on that and analyze summarized data from sensor X, alert upon critical status, and essentially this stores the data. So this stores information, but then you can take it on other paths. So it's kind of a way of processing data in multiple ways, which if you think about a company, if you look at websites, for example, and how essentially you may want instant data from who's viewing your website, jurisdiction, how many clicks a second, to be processed at the same time. And this is one way you can do it using cryptography. So to give an example of how DAGs apply to the batching process pipeline, suppose you have a database of global sales and you want a report of all sales by region expressed in US dollars. You might first load all data into a process engine, separate out data by the different currencies, convert the financial figures to US dollars, summarize the data by country, region, then bring all the data together into a final report. And let's say that the US only data will be created into a separate report as well. This data flow could be represented by the DAG shown on the next slide. So it does it all in once. You can see load data from sales database, separate the data by currency, and you can see the kind of benefits that you get from a DAG, it's kind of becomes a little bit more computational in terms of what you can process in opposition with like a standard kind of blockchain. So they're very different. So since DAGs apply to both streams of batching process, it is increasingly common to have hybrid data processing environments that handle both streams and batch data sets. Technologies such as Hazelcast Jet that are designed to handle both types of data let companies build data architectures that take advantage of all their data. So it's a very data focused. And what have we seen with the internet? We've had huge sort of leaks and sort of battles, philosophical battles over your data on the internet with the likes of Facebook and stuff like this. DAGs, I think, are very well positioned to be something that institutions harness. So this is essentially the tech behind Hedera Hashgraph. It utilizes something called asynchronous Byzantine fault tolerant security as its security mechanism. This just means that there isn't a schedule for nodes to cross-reference each other, reach consensus. So it's a proof of stake that has no block time. It's not a blockchain, it's a DAG. The nodes communicate with one another randomly, essentially. So this is a DAG. This is a standard blockchain, although I like to think of them as going just vertically up. And then this is Hedera's kind of version of this DAG. So it's almost parallel and horizontal data flowing. And you can see this makes Hedera extremely fast, cheap, and gives a very high throughput. So you can see, of course, we've got Hedera here. If you look at transactions per second, which we'll come on to, because when they say 10,000 transactions per second, they're talking about if you just want to send funds, so not do smart contracts or anything else with it. Then, I mean, you can even get as low as 10 transactions per second. So it's kind of unfair that they branded themselves like this. Also, who the hell, what kind of a blockchain is using 10,000 transactions per second? So the average fees, exceptionally cheap. The transaction confirmation is extremely fast, and the energy usage is, negligent. It doesn't really exist. So Hedera is basically a layer one blockchain, allowing people to deploy smart contracts on the network. Just a quick word on the 10K TPS. It only applies to moving funds wallet to wallet, not smart contracts, which have a way lower TPS and other stats, some as low as 10 transactions per second. You can see smart contract, you're looking at 350 TPS, and topic creation transactions, you're looking at 5. And then, so they're really only applying with a 10K to just moving funds. Hedera uses EVM, so that's the language. EVM can only do roughly 300 transactions per second with the way that it currently runs on hardware. Let's move on to the tokenomics, because some other shadiness with the tokenomics, I think. If I can call it that, maybe I'm wrong. Please correct me below. So Hbar is supposed to have a fixed supply of 50 billion tokens, which is a huge supply, by the way, guys. And they claim that currently 27 billion or 28 billion essentially have been released. However, Hedera Hashgraph and Swirl, essentially, if they see fit, can raise the supply. So, or if Hedera breaks fundamental promises made to the market by it and Swirls, such as creating additional Hbar after promising a fixed supply, that's an issue. And they talk about this in sort of bankrupt cases and stuff like that. So 50% of Hbar supply was sold for $100 million back in 2018 to credit in investors, rich people essentially. Some of the other private sales have seen Hbar sold for 0.1%, going all the way up to 12 cents. Tokens have been about for a while. It's been traded since 2019. With a lot of token supply being given to early investors, this has led to them dumping back in the early days. And as a response, Hbar essentially came up and gave them more Hbar, but in the kind of agreement that there were scheduled lock-in periods. And you can see you still have 43% of the supply that's locked. It's a lot to still hit the open markets. So the tokens and economics are a bit crap, to be quite honest with you. And there is no blockchain and closed validator pools. However, network fees are paid in Hbar, driving demand with usage. However, validators take 90% of this, so the closed consensus validators. and these fees, and essentially Swirl takes the extra 10%, and they all sell on the open market, which is interesting. And if someone got hold of, let's say, 1/3 of Hbar supply, they would crash the network. And this is officially from Hbar's documentation. So one major positive for Hbar is the partnerships that they have, and the fact that they're a DAG may prove, certainly for institutions that may want to process data in multiple ways, you know, it can be a bit of a choice, a bit of an obvious choice, actually, I think. But they've got amazing partnerships, probably one of the biggest blockchain partnerships that I've seen thus far. You know, these guys have worked across the board, and you can see here the UK sort of health service they worked with, the NHS. I mean, these are just some of their partnerships. It's insane, some of the partnerships that these guys have. It truly is amazing. So my conclusion to the whole lot, it's an institutional crypto. May do well as a result of that. Sketchy sort of tokenomics. You know, I don't like the fact that Swirl can just up. There's a lot of Hedera, but then again, I guess they're not trying to be a blockchain that goes against the kind of blockchain ethics of decentralization, you know, fixed supply, all this sort of stuff that Bitcoin kind of brought to the table. So it's non-open source, a little bit worrying. Closed validator set for now. Hedera Council can remove any smart contract they want, which is a concern. Just have some concerns, but I think it may do well due to its partnerships. Small community, most of them actually have no idea what Hedera actually is. If you tell them or ask them about DAG, they'll look at you with a blank face. You know, but then again, I think most people in the crypto space are just here to speculate. There's nothing wrong with that, I don't think. And that's where the space is at right now. It's coming to maturity where it actually gets used and implemented in all of our lives. So the community is lackluster. It's not really there, in my opinion. And again, the people that promote it and sort of the community that way, I don't really feel, not from the devs that probably are working on it. You know, they've probably got a lot to say that's valid, but the sort of community, the retail community, I feel like really don't understand Hbar. So hopefully this video has brought some clarity. It may be worth taking a punt on this as an investment. Remember, not financial advice, but not actually a massive fan of the project compared to other projects out there. So I just think the institutional partnerships will help it gain institutional adoption, which is big money, ladies and gentlemen. So this has been around about 23 minutes long. Hopefully you guys now will understand what Hbar is, some of the pros and cons to it, how it works, and who's behind it. On that note, I'm going to love and leave you. Let me know your thoughts. Greatly appreciated. You know, maybe I've said or given some wrong information here. Feel free to correct me below. All I've got for you guys. See you in the next one.